things are kind of rough right now. And as we're about to take a look at a different way to view the prophets, I pray that you will please open our eyes and our hearts and help us to listen to what you have to say to us in the midst of all of this chaos. In Jesus' name, amen. So what my plan is for today is we're just going to talk about the introduction in chapter 1. Next week, we'll worry about chapter 2 and chapter 3. But I think it would be a good idea for us to just kind of get our feet wet a little bit and just kind of figure out what's up, what's down, what direction we're actually moving in, and to just kind of see how you guys are liking the book so far. And there are two really big questions that we're going to tackle a little bit today. The introduction focused a lot on what a prophet actually is and what a prophet actually does. And I think that's going to be a pretty big question for us going, obviously, throughout the entire book, because prophecy is one of the main themes that he's going to be playing with. And then the first chapter takes a look at the role of emotions, especially anger, sadness, and grief, and how they may actually have benefits for people in a prophetic role. And those are the two big things we're going to kind of unpack. But to start out, how are you liking the book so far? How's it finding you? Some subtle head nodding from Brady.
I like a lot.
Yeah, like a lot so far. It's good.
I just picked it up.
You didn't pick up. So, do you like the cover? Does it feel good in your hands? Like, I'll take all of
It's
that.
like Richard Rohr, so.
Yeah.
So.
That's good. Okay.
I didn't.
Okay, fantastic. And again, if you haven't had a chance to crack into it yet, or if you're like not super deep into it, that's not really an issue. I'll touch on a couple things from the book, but the big things I'm going to sort of take away from today really are sort of the bigger questions that he's dealing with. Next question. How many of you know a thing or two about Richard Rohr? You volunteered your services. What can you tell? So you've read up these other books, right?
Well, I've heard, all people referencing him and
Yeah.
sermons and this, that, the other. But he's, my understanding, he's a Catholic.
Mhm.
That just his theology just, hits the heart, I think, kind of thing with,
Yeah, just some of the basic background
I
stuff.
have one friend who,
Yeah.
almost was kind of, like ready to leave the church, and that Richard Rohr is who brought her back in.
Yeah, and
Yes.
so a lot of folks who have deconstructed or are questioning will sometimes bump into him.
Mhm.
And his view of things is extremely focused on the active love of God and the belief that the presence of God is literally suffusing every single element of creation. So he's a Franciscan, if I'm remembering right, a Franciscan priest, which again, there's a big positive view of nature and the natural world in that specific subset of the Catholic Church. He's originally from Topeka, Kansas, which I did not know. And I've also discovered that he spent a lot of time working in New Mexico, which is I think where he's currently based out of Albuquerque. Have any of you ever been to New Mexico or spent time like around Ghost Ranch, for instance? No? Am I the only person who's actually been to Ghost Ranch? I know you have. Oh, Jody, that's right. Yeah, that's right. I'm sorry, sir. I forgot you were in the room for like hot 5 seconds. I forgot you spent some time down there. I don't know if you've ever heard of Ghost Ranch before. I was actually lucky enough to go there when I was a kid, but it's sort of I think that it has an affiliation with some parts of the Presbyterian Church, if I'm remembering its history right. But it's sort of a summer camp for adults who want to explore and better themselves in a lot of ways. And it makes sense that he would sort of set up there and start teaching there. So he calls himself the panentheist, which is sort of the version of believing in God literally being present in every aspect of creation, or sort of suffusing himself in all things. And he is very, very focused on unity in a way that may be a little different for us as Protestants. We sort of unpack his version of spirituality. We're going to get to see some really interesting features of that. That may be why it's attractive to someone who's struggling with things and wanted sort of a different take on stuff. If you talk with folks who are in the evangelical church, they'll tell you, stay the hell away from Richard Rohr. He's not good for your faith. And again, that usually means I should definitely dive into him and learn more about him. That's often a sign that I want to kind of unpack and explore what he has to say. So let's begin with the biggest question that he brings up in the introduction. When I say the word prophet, what do you think a prophet is? What pops in your head?
Truth teller.
Truth teller. That's good.
Teller.
A fortune teller.
Fortune teller.
I have to tell myself that's not right, it's a truth teller.
Okay. But, right, don't spoil it. We'll get to that. So what we've got truth teller, we've got fortune teller on the board. Keep going.
And a foreteller too.
That's what I was, that's what I meant.
A foreteller, right? Somebody who sees what's gonna happen, right? Okay. What else?
A leader.
A leader, right? Somebody who's visible, right? I heard the gears turning, and so I'm just gonna migrate to stand. Go ahead.
A prophet is one who identifies what is wrong in society.
Mhm.
So that's that truth teller.
Right, right.
Yeah,
Also usually rejected by the people that they're
Yeah.
talking
Yeah.
to.
yeah.
That's part of the truth teller component of things. Because, I mean, do people want to have the truth told to them?
Usually not.
No.
Interesting watching the role of, the identity of Joseph. Evolve over time, because he was a pain in the ass.
Mhm.
He was telling the truth, but
Right,
driving people crazy, just,
Yeah.
shut up, we're gonna sell you into slavery, you're driving us so crazy, and
Yeah.
you know, and then he involves into, anyway, so
No,
sometimes prophets are a pain,
yeah, and that sort of feeds
they can be
into
obnoxious.
very obnoxious, and it could definitely drive people crazy. So on that note, and you brought up Joseph as he's a great example. Because, I mean, his prophetic voice got him into a lot of trouble and would eventually continue to get him into trouble up to a certain point during his journey. Do you have other particular, do you guys have any favorites out of the prophets that you've seen in the Bible? Like when I say like prophet, is there a specific person or a book that pops into your head?
Isaiah.
Isaiah, yeah, nice.
I'm not surprised that that's the first answer that I hear. Jeremiah, right? Prophet of, people call him the prophet of tears. Any of you read Jeremiah lately? Was it a fun experience? He can be a tough read, but he's a rewarding one. Who else? Again, just sort of thinking in line of favorites. No, it's just Isaiah and Jeremiah. Those are the two.
I think that sort of Jonah, I think is very interesting because Jonah was so mad at God in the end.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah, Jonah really. And that also raises that question of, do prophets have to always be in the moral right, right? Because I mean, Jonah really struggled with that. And he really struggled with the kindness of God. And it depending on which prophet you're looking at, you can see differing levels of them wrestling with the message that they had been given to speak, right? And Jesus. Yes. Yeah, right. It's a classic. Gold star. Good job. Well done. So, are there any others? Any of you like Ezekiel? No, no one's super interested in cooking your food over dung, tying yourself up and lying facing a model of the city that you're prophesying is going to be sacked. Not a big fan. So, have you read some weird stuff in the prophets when you dug around in them? Yeah, so some of them will act out what they're doing. They use what I would argue would be sort of tools of art when they are constructing some of their messages, in particular Ezekiel. They can get really creative. I mean, if you look at Hosea, for instance, and the mandate to go out and marry a prostitute at the beginning of the book, right? He's sort of acting out the message that he's been told. So when we take a look at the beginning of the book, Richard brings up the fact that prophets are definitely going to be truth tellers, but he doesn't focus so much on prophets as fortune tellers or people who see the future. Instead, he argues that the most important thing that prophets do is criticize. Does that ring true to you guys?
Mhm.
Why?
Because they're critics of society themselves, itself.
Right,
Um,
yeah. And that's one of the reasons I think that their message is not all super positively received. Right. Who do they typically speak to?
The religious
Power,
the religious leaders.
religious leaders, right? Any other way that you would sort of think about the audience of most prophets? And to be clear, those are correct, but do prophets often target individuals?
No, it's like, people or.
Yeah,
It's
right.
that large.
And off the top of my head, I can think of one prophet who ever targeted an individual, but it was Nathan going after King David specifically. Right, and is that what you were gonna say?
I said it to Brady.
Yeah, he's like, right, because in particular, but I think this primary reason that Nathan was upset at King David is because it was a head state who was doing something that he should not do, mainly condone murder or sanctioned murder of an innocent person, right? Super relevant to what we're going through right now. Not too much. Matt, you were gonna say something else? I heard you make a noise like you had something else you wanted to say.
Oh, no, I don't know.
Well, if it comes back, just let me know. So-
It's like what God gave us, like when he, in whatever way or form, like left us the scriptures, he left us the prophets, like as in terms of letters and books that were written to the societies or to the groups, sorry, to the groups.
Yeah. And again, prophets are very much gonna have sort of this community function. And when I was reading this, that was a huge relief for me. Because coming out of an evangelical world, you're sort of trained to read the prophets as an individual. Like, what are they saying to me? And this very much deconstructs or challenges that idea that when we're looking at what prophets are saying, we have to remember that they're speaking to power. And especially if they're talking to an individual, it's usually directed at an individual ruler, but more often they're talking to us as the community. Right, they're encouraging us to return to God, they're encouraging us to abandon idols, they're encouraging us to pursue justice and love mercy and do justly and that kind of, there I heard.
Yeah, so I was thinking what I was gonna say earlier was, the whole, and I think to some level, I've had to strip away the idea of the prophets, there's, of always like foretelling something, right?
Yeah,
You know, and so like even, let's set aside things like, like Revelation or some of those kinds of, but even like, that everything's pointing to Christ or something, which
Yeah.
on a level is, it's true. I think we should hold on to that, but not lose the prophetic message of, speaking to the then.
Mhm.
In other words, if we keep looking in the Bible and we see the prophets are like, they're talking about the end times or whatever,
Mhm.
it's always something that's out there. And then we can sort of ignore the problems of now. Right?
Correct,
And that's what and if we flip it, they're much more relevant.
yes.
To
absolutely.
today, because it's the human sin and injustice and things are, it's human nature, right? It's
Yeah,
today.
exactly.
Yeah, sorry.
No, why are you apologizing? That's great. It's fantastic. And also, I think very much in the vein of what he's trying to get at. By punting it to predicting the future, we are not allowing it to talk to us as a community in our current circumstances. Because there's a lot in the prophets that I think that we could benefit from right now. And when you look at the intro, he talks about this concept of something called holy disorder, where we want to bring challenges to the status quo. We want to push back against what authority is doing. Because again, he also points out, when you look at the relationship between the church and critical thinking and the church and power, the church has failed to reform every empire it has ever been a part of. If you look at us from the context of human history, which is a scathing condemnation of the church.
I want to interject a breath of hope, though.
Yeah, I'll get to the hope, don't worry, but please do.
Yeah, no, just in reaction to what you just said, which I
Yeah.
do acknowledge.
Yes,
It's absolutely true, what you just said. Kingdom versus kingdom, this kingdom that knows better has failed to speak truth to power.
yeah,
At the level at which Jesus says the kingdom is in the midst of you, there have always been faithful people
Mhm.
who in the face of all that's going on, choose to love, choose to forgive,
Right.
choose to pray, choose to sprinkle and remind us that we belong to someone else.
right. Yeah, and that's where he's heading, which is good. It begins with that acknowledgement though. Yeah, go ahead.
So is there any distinction to be made between like the sense of empire leadership or like political influence on culture? Because living in the Middle East where there like has not been, well, I mean, in Lebanon, there's Christian influence, but in the Arabian Gulf or the Persian Gulf, there really isn't. And there is such a difference between, I feel like, lands where Christians were a part of creating hospitals, creating generosity.
Mhm.
There's like a thing of forgiveness, just a general pervasive sense of what it would mean to forgive instead of to still live as like eye for an eye or things like that, that I think
Sure.
our culture really does benefit from, but it
Yes.
wasn't like, it wasn't law-based or, you know, like the
Right.
church and the emperor, or whatever. Anyway, I just wondering if there's this.
Perfect, and I think that there is a meaningful distinction between those things. So when he makes that criticism, and says that within that context, I think that he is specifically talking about a top-down change.
Yeah.
Where there is an alteration in the way that the folks at the top, the people who are in power, changing the actual fundamental organization of the society. Well, but when you're looking at what Michael is describing, what you're describing, we're talking about what I would think of as a bottom-up change,
Exactly.
right?
Exactly.
Where
what I was thinking.
When you look at people caring about the love of God, caring about their neighbor, setting up hospitals, medical missions, and actually going, what do you need today to survive? How can I feed you, clothe you, and shelter you? When you see people actually make those tangible choices, I think that's where you end up seeing that bottom-up transformation, but it's more, and I think that he would agree with this, it's more grassroots. It's more about us working together to try to push back against what's happening at the top. Because again, and this is largely me just talking from his perspective, when we're looking at power, most of the top-down power that we see is largely corrupt and has often been used to harm more so than it has been used to cause good. Does that make sense? In the context of phenomenal. All right, yeah, and again, the other thing, this is just me speaking as an educator. There was on page, well, again, it's all in Roman numerals. It's technically, I think, supposed to be the number 17, but it's XVII, if I'm gonna spit that out. My Roman numerals are super duper rusty, even for an academic. When I saw him mention this quote, I've got it on the sheet here. He says, we must ask, why has critical thinking always had to come from outside our religious systems and hardly been allowed from within? Again, just,
Underlined arrow.
yeah, right. XV,
It's XV.
Roman numeral XVII. Yeah, and the italics are his on the sheet, not mine.
Thank you.
Sure. Okay, just speaking as a psych professor, speaking as somebody who's taught critical thinking to students and studies, like I got very excited. And I nearly dropped the book and made like a noise, and I think that Sarah sort of looked over me kind of weird while I was reading this. I was really thrilled to see someone talk about critical thinking. And I was also really thrilled for someone to make this connection between critical thinking needing to come from outside the church. Why do you think that is? Why do you think the church has had sort of a negative relationship with critical thinking?
Because we're afraid.
Oh,
The
sir.
whole thing could be a house of cards and you poke a hole and say,
Right,
what do you mean this isn't the inerrant word of God?
yeah,
What are we left with?
and yes, and thank you for the sound effects too. I
Yeah,
appreciate
I
that.
thought, you know, the whole thing in the Catholic Church where, you know, people, well, and every church, whatever, but the Bible wasn't in a language that anybody could read.
Yeah.
People couldn't read really, but they weren't supposed to. It was supposed to just go on to the priests and the, you know, whatever, and they were supposed to tell and you were just supposed to receive. You
Yeah,
weren't supposed to think for yourself.
oh,
Yeah.
I don't know if I agree with that though.
oh, no, please, yes, debate.
Because there have been many times in history where people within the church have criticized other parts of the church. The results have just been, we left the church and made our own church. And so like the Reformation is a great example, right? They tried to criticize and reform the Catholic Church. It didn't work. And they left and made their own. And then I'm not saying the critical thinking was always comprehensive and it wasn't always
Mhm.
addressing all of the issues, but there were times where people brought up problems and said, we're gonna
Mhm.
do something different, and it's gone down to minutia of can women be in leadership or not, in more modern times. I mean, there's been lots of reforming happening, but I think that the problem is the reforming often separates, and so then the people who maybe need some of the reform don't get it because the people who reformed left. And so as a church, I think there hasn't been comprehensive
Mhm.
calling out necessarily, or if there is, it's not affecting everybody. But I think within the church, there's been pieces of that.
Okay,
If,
so,
if so, but to push a little and get more of what you see. Go back to the original example of Luther trying to reform the Catholic Church.
mhm.
What stopped them from hearing Luther's ideas?
Well, the power structure,
But why would they be unable to hear it?
you mean the Catholic Church?
Mhm.
Because they wanted to keep the power structure that they had.
Yeah.
Right. And that happens whether it's pure power, whether it's a holding to some kind of doctrine or, whatever that might be along the stages when people have brought up questions.
Mhm.
There's a number of different reasons why it gets shut down, but I think there have been voices and pieces of the church have gone on to do different things outside of the larger system.
Mhm. Hmm. Okay, that's fair.
I agree with that, and I mean, I heard a lot of yeses around her, and I think also maybe more broadly self-protection, whether it's personal self-protection or self-protection of a group that you feel responsible for,
Mhm.
or something like that. Because I do think that it's power somewhat, for sure, for sure, and by different definitions. And then also, sometimes I've wondered about, we have to have lots of friends who became pastors in the evangelical tradition.
Mm.
And I've wondered sometimes, like I remember this one time we were having this conversation with a pastor friend of ours over like the way that they do church membership, let's say. And the idea is that the way they do church membership is biblical, and we were kind of trying to say we don't really see that, right? And for this specific evangelical, it's like biblical, Bible is the whatever. So we're having this conversation, and by the end of it, he kind of has to say, okay, it's not biblical in that sense. It's really just practical. I'm like, okay, great. Like it's practical, right? Like this is either or. But at some point, this is my thinking. At some point, if you have been in that position, you're the pastor of a church, everybody is looking to you to like lead this thing. You've been teaching the same thing for all this time or whatever. If you go about a change of heart and have to change what you have said for all these people for all this time, and deal with yourself that maybe you've misled people,
Right.
Or this kind of thing, it's too much. Like that is such a burden to carry, particularly when you carry seriously like the shepherding of people and things like that. And I think there can just be an unconscious self-protection in other ways as well as like protecting your power, influence, or position or that.
No, absolutely. And he talks about this bleeding the lines between enter and chapter 1. He does talk about but his argument is that every priest, every pastor should have a prophet to counterbalance them. Because in order to be an effective teacher, you need to have a critic present who is pushing back against that message to make sure that you're held accountable. Right? Like, I mean, in a lot of ways, the prophet's office is about criticism and it's about accountability. So we look at Sarah's bringing up those moments where people had pushed back against the church, and yeah, I mean, to be fair, they do typically say, "I'm going to take my ball and go home," or "I'm fine, screw you guys, I'm going home and I'm going to start my own church that's going to be cooler with like squirrels and acrobats or whatever."
Sometimes
Yeah.
they've had to, because
They had to
been
because
excommunicated.
Yeah.
Right, they're like heretics, their lives are threatened. There's risk with the office of prophet, but again, those moments where people have pushed back, I think, are clear indications of the prophetic voice speaking out and pushing back against something that the church is doing wrong. And it has led to disorder, right? It has led to people finding places of worship or communities where they feel more comfortable. So because of that and because it's disruptive, have we seen a lot of examples of prophets in the church in the last 30 or 40 years? Some head nodding, some interesting facial expressions, some blank stares, some, oh no, can I think of anybody? Now, they're making lots of different answers. Let's see what you guys have on this one.
I'm still stuck on the idea that each opportunity where there was a fracture was an inherent growth opportunity for whoever was feeling challenged.
Hmm.
So it's like if you bring something to the table that I find threatening, rather than, you know, me building a wall or you saying I have to leave because you know, it's like,
Yeah.
no, we're stuck on this planet. We're gonna work this out. We believe in one God.
Right. So I would have normally kicked back to the blacks here in just a second, but V, you had an interesting reaction. I'm gonna give some space to that.
Just thinking about when speaking truth to things, I mean, this probably, I don't know, this would be prophetic, but when Paul and Barnabas were out on the missionary journey, and wasn't Barnabas chose, I thought Mark was cool that that they had Mark and Timothy with them. I'm making this story up? Mark and Timothy with them, and Mark had gone and done something different, and Paul didn't trust him to go with them on their
Mhm.
journey. And but Barnabas went, and I hope I got Barnabas right. Went with him, and so they split ways. So I mean, talking about, you know, churches, you know, they split ways, but I don't think it's always a bad thing that they just split ways, because he was able to be mentor and everything to Mark in a different, you know, different thing. And but
Yeah.
again, whether that's prophetic voice, I don't know, but I don't know that that's always a bad thing, is all I'm saying.
No, and that's fair. And again, there's gonna be tension in this discussion, and it's good because it isn't a simple black and white answer. And I don't know, the deeper into the book you get, I think you're gonna find he's not super into the black and white answers. He likes things to be a little bit messy. Okay, there was noise back here. Please, go ahead.
I just thought of, because the way that you phrased the question made it
Sure.
kind of sounded like we're leading toward a no, like there isn't so many prophetic voices. But I do think there have been, and I was just wondering, in a day of so much like noise, right? Like social media noise, whatever. We don't always see them, but I think, I mean, there have been people, right, like kicked out of the Southern Baptist scenario
Right.
because of saying things that they felt like needed to be said, you know, I think there's a
Yeah,
lot of.
and I think of what's her name?
I think Beth Moore.
Beth Moore.
Prophetic voice. That's one
Right.
one thing that came to
Right.
me, yes.
Yeah.
I also think there's a small handful of kind of artists who are specifically speaking against
Yes.
Christians. There's a guy named Scott, I can't remember his last name, out of Austin, Shane Claiborne, and out of North Lake. Yeah. And doing a lot of very active, very vocal, like speaking to the Christians about these things, and being an antagonistic voice. And I think there's not very many of them, but on social media, which unfortunately I have it more than I like to.
Lutheran pastor who's covered in tattoos. The one that-
Nadia Bowles-Weber. I love
His name
her.
is my favorite.
Right. Yeah, and that, oh,
Father Barber.
let's see what's going on over here. Nancy, do you have something you want to share with us?
Oh, no, I was just asking if he knew who my favorite person is. He's looking it up.
Stan? Jesus. Now, this feeds into another question that I wanted to ask you guys. Who are modern prophets to you? And we've already heard a couple answers on that. Nadia Bowles-Weber, again, that artist that you were talking about, I already forgot his name. Thank you, Edie. Very small working memory. Who else would you consider a modern prophet? Either inside the church or outside of the church?
I think stepping back.
Yeah.
Within our history, because it didn't just happen, 4,000 years ago and today. I think the civil rights movement was
Yeah,
propelled by
absolutely.
the Black church. I think during the Civil War era, the Quakers and other parts of the Christian church in the United States were really pushing for abolition.
Yeah.
So I think there are places that you can identify where there have been sections of the church that have called out the larger church. And usually to help the oppressed or people who don't have a voice.
Yeah.
Or claiming their own voice but there were, during the civil rights era, there were white Christians also that came alongside to try to give space for those Black voices to speak.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, the Black community, I think, is an example of a place where a lot of modern prophets have been. Where else may you have seen someone you would consider a modern prophet? Again, either in the church or outside of the church, both are valid.
I think Rohr himself, like, is this, but prior to this book, and just for specifically him calling out the dualistic thinking in the church, which I think I believe we really need to.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I think he's been trying to call that out very humbly and with a lot of acceptance for a long time.
What was the name?
Richard Rohr, yeah.
David Stu. Yeah. Any other examples?
Like not within, like from the church, but to the larger society, like Wilberforce.
Mhm.
Or Martin Luther King from the church, but going forward, that kind of stuff, where it's not
Yeah.
specifically talking to the church itself with, like, which more like the two guys I mentioned are, but from
Sure.
the church going out. I think
Yeah.
that's because a lot of times they have these things, but they're not coming at it in the same kind of, like Wilberforce, whatever, and coming at it in a different direction.
I mean, the Episcopal priest that literally called it out during the.
Yeah.
Bishop, but
Bishop, but she got up and, no, and I have never seen a clearer moment of the Holy Spirit basically grabbing power by the shoulders and trying to shake somebody away from that moment. That was, I very much believe, a prophetic instance. So, yeah. Any others?
A lot of the songwriters, folk songwriters, Chris Christopherson has some songs, the lyrics are just really prophetic.
Yes.
Ends with the love part, but criticizes, in some places the church, but lots of times the government.
Yeah, and that would be a great example. So Chris Christopherson's on our list now too. Anybody else? I know that there are more. This is just a question I just really wanted to ask.
So even that dude is that thing, it's sorry, social media nerdy, but the guy who's like, he literally makes like a folk song every day.
Oh, no, I haven't heard that guy.
Oh my gosh, it's fantastic. I mean, it's like Woody Guthrie style,
Yeah.
and he's a young dude and he's just like making
Right.
outstanding just
Yeah.
folk music, and he's doing it.
And-
He's extremely famous. Right?
And in folk music, especially because I would say that Woody Guthrie definitely filled that role at a point for sure. And again, there's a big tradition of that in different genres of music. There are two examples that I think of when I think about modern prophets that really pop into my head. One of them you've heard of, and one of them I would be surprised if any of you have ever heard of them. First one is Jon Stewart from The Daily Show. And I don't agree with everything that he has to say, but what he is doing is he is desperately trying to criticize and call out nonsense and lies whenever he sees them, and he uses humor to do it. And I really, even though I don't think he's right about anything, and I've seen him, especially like recently, he's just been talking over his guests and not letting them get a word in edgewise, which I'm a little annoyed with him about. The other example that I have, which again, I'm gonna be shocked if any of you have ever heard of these guys. The folk music community has a big role in that, and the death metal community has a big role, and they can have a prophetic voice as well. One of my favorite bands is a group called Cattle Decapitation. Have you ever heard of them before? I wouldn't recommend it if you're not super into death metal and you don't like gore. They put out an album right before the pandemic called Death Atlas. And the entire album was about climate change and corporate greed and how we have essentially surrendered ourselves to those things. And it calls us out for all of the little choices that we make, not necessarily to do things like not recycling, but how we kind of shut up and go along with those things. And how they basically look at that sort of as a roadmap to our own deaths. And if you ever want to listen to it, I can give you a recommendation, like one song you could maybe tolerate. But when I listened to that, I very much heard a prophetic voice challenging the way that I had thought about how to navigate my relationship to the environment and the world. So it had a big critical effect on me. Does that make sense? And the reason I'm bringing those two examples up is because I don't think prophecy exclusively lives just inside the church, because I don't think that God's voice is only going to come from other Christians. Does that make sense?
In college, me too.
You too, very,
I
yeah,
mean, they're powerful.
yes,
Yeah.
yeah. So this is, I mean, hang on, let me monitor my time here. Are we doing okay? We've got 5, 10, 15, 20 minutes left. I have the problem with this book is I'm gonna have more to talk about than we're gonna have time for, but again, I think that's a good problem. So we talked about, so I would like you to reflect on the role of a prophet going into these next few chapters, because he's gonna start to dig into specific prophets pretty soon. But before we get to that, let's flip over to the back matter here. Let's talk a bit about the phrase, the tiers of things, and what it actually means. And if you take a look at the beginning of chapter 1 here, I'll get you a page number.
There's no page on it.
Oh, it's page 1, yeah. I'm gonna read this to you guys. In the first book of Virgil's Aeneid, line 462, the hero Aeneas gazes at a mural that depicts a battle of the Trojan War and the deaths of his friends and countrymen. He is so moved with sorrow at the tragedy of it that he speaks of the tears of things, the lacrimae rerum. As Shamus Haney translates it, there are tears at the heart of things, at the heart of our human experience. Only tears can move both Aeneas and us beyond our deserved and paralyzing anger at evil, death, and injustice, without losing the deep legitimacy of that anger. That's his opening statement for the whole book. How does that strike you guys?
As powerful and true. I have not only underlined an arrow, but 2 lines by it as well.
Yeah.
It's very true, because things. I cry at everything. I'm gonna say that.
That's fine.
But when you see things that really resonate with you,
Mhm.
you cry. And I mean, it's a way to feel. So-
Yeah. Right.
I think it's really interesting because like having been raised in the evangelical church, the idea of anger is not really talked about or quote unquote allowed or something like this.
Yeah.
But like the idea of the tears of things, like that anger producing this deep well of sadness was actually like the grief from the right like something is wrong that can also propel you, but like as opposed to just sitting and being depressed, it's propelling you towards action.
Yeah.
Which I think I find a lot in my life that I've been able to see the benefits of that, and I get questions about it like all the time.
Yes.
And so that kind of like hearing that, I was like, oh, okay, cool. Like, this I feel like it's right, but there aren't a lot of voices saying, yeah, this is right, you should do that.
Mhm.
Yeah, but seeing this kind of stuff, like, yeah, I feel it resonates a lot with me.
Gotcha. Good. Any other thoughts?
And empathy is a piece of that, and there's a lot of people calling empathy toxic at this point, so. That, I mean, there's a lot of not just not talking about it, but outright like discouraging it.
Yeah.
Discourage it, but I do have this fear, not for myself, but for people I love.
Mhm.
And it's to me, it's overwhelming.
Yeah.
And I don't know where to go. I have small things I'm doing,
Yeah.
best I know how, but I can't imagine that there aren't other people who feel the same way.
Are you okay, Bonnie?
Yeah.
Okay.
Would you flush it out for us?
Well, I just think of, well, this is a simple one. I don't do downtown demonstrations.
Mhm.
I belong to a business and people see me doing something they disagree with, perhaps,
Mhm.
then they will not come use our business. And the business is not my I'm not living off of that business,
Hmm.
but my kids are.
Mhm.
And if I do something that reflects off of the farm or then hurts my kids, I don't know if I can live with it.
Hmm.
And I realize this is one of those things about stepping away from family. And I'm like, okay,
Yeah.
got a lot to get around if I'm ever gonna get to that place.
Sure.
Hmm.
Yeah. But this brings up,
It's something else.
well, I know, but here's the thing. Prepping this was really interesting, because you see I have this nice sheet of all these questions that I jotted down while I was reading. And then I shot somebody and murdered them this week. And let's call it what it is, it was a murder. We invaded Venezuela unjustly. We're now threatening to invade Greenland. I've been furious all week long, and I've been in that moment where I'm having a hard time articulating my anger. I'm feeling overwhelmed. What do I do? Can I go out and protest? Like, again, as a professor at the college, it's good for me to be out, but there are risks that are connected with that. I've wanted to post something on social media, but they're going out and they're hunting down professors whenever they do that, so I've had to be quiet, right? So there's suddenly a lot of risk, and if you're going out and protesting, you can get harmed. And one of the things he talks about in chapter 1 has actually helped me out a lot. So I think that this may be more useful than just looking at the questions that I wrote down. He talks about the relationship between anger, grief, and tears and empathy, and that being sort of the arc of growth of a prophet throughout their career. When you look at the early writings of a prophet, they often start in a place of anger. I'm angry that this happened. I want to do something about it. I want to fight back. Why is this happening? Why is this awful? Why is the world so full of evil? I'm overwhelmed. I don't know what to do. People wake up and do something about this. And you often hear that in the prophetic voice. Like, I mean, Isaiah has those vibes. Ezekiel really, and he actually used Ezekiel as the example, really has those vibes. But then as you look at the middle and then the later portions of the prophet, you see things change, where it switches over to praise, consolation, peace, gratitude. Isaiah begins with terror and darkness and invasions and bad things are going to happen, and it ends in a place of describing the wilderness being glad and the desert rejoicing and blooming, and the ransomed of the Lord walking upon new highways made through the wasteland. These are images of restoration, right? And what Rohr argues for in that first chapter is the idea that when they have that moment of grief, when they experience the sacredness of empathy and connection with all things, that anger doesn't go away, but it opens the door for sadness. It opens the door for empathy. It opens the door for a deeper connection with God. And when that moment happens, there are tears. That actual act of crying about something, because not that you're so paralyzed with anger necessarily, but just why does this have to happen? God? And that brings a holy grief, and that holy grief brings transformation. Does that make sense? And I'm describing, basically summarizing chapter 1, but I freaking lived that this week. And it's really difficult for me to not get, sorry, I'm getting you in trouble. It's really difficult for me to not, I can't ignore what's happening because lives are actually being lost. And I'm having a hard, personally speaking, I'm very angry at God, but I'm not angry in the way that I was. Now I'm more furious at the fact that people aren't listening to what the gospel of peace is supposed to be. And I'm also, the thing that I'm having a hard time with is trying to find a moment of compassion for the people who are perpetrating these horrible things, which may be one of the ways that the Holy Spirit's going to challenge me as I continue to dig into this book. Does that make sense, Ben?
Yeah.
Well, that was like when Sandy Hook happened.
Oh, gosh, yes.
I wept. I mean, for days, I kept
Yeah.
thinking, for the moms, I kept thinking, what would it be like to put your kindergartner
Yeah.
on a bus in the United States? And they
Yeah.
don't come home.
I know, it's awful.
And I mean, that was the first time that I had those tears. I mean, I sat in the house and wept for those
Yeah.
moms, dads.
Yes, what,
And what did we do about it?
right. Speaking of, so you had mentioned Nadia Bolz-Weber a little while ago. She, in her book Accidental Saints, actually writes about the Sandy Hook shooting, and she at her church had a service where they read out the names of every single person every child had been killed. And she had a moment of, I think, experiencing the tears of things. The very last name she read out was Adam Lanza, the shooter, who had struggled with depression and psychological problems. And she recognized that there was an enormous amount of pain and suffering that brought him to that moment. I mean, it's sort of like along the lines of Corrie ten Boom forgiving the Nazi guards who abused her, which, man, I had a hard time with that.
I think though, what I find interesting from his perspective is I think the Catholic Church holds a place for suffering in a way that the American church has profoundly rejected.
Yeah.
I think Americans like things to be tied up in bows and have everything be nice and have everything be clean. And I think the Catholic Church always, for all of its ups and downs over history, has always had a place for what suffering means
Mhm.
and also what it does to us as people, not just as the pain of it, but also the things we can learn in those experiences and the empathy we can gain from those
Yeah.
experiences. And I just think the American church in a lot of ways is so sanitized that we don't talk about those things.
Yeah.
We just want to fix things and move on because it's the clean way to handle things, because that's the way white Americans want to handle things.
It might even be the Protestant church in a general sense
Yeah.
too, because you think even liturgically, theologically, I mean, the Catholics celebrate the mass every time they worship,
Yeah.
which is getting around the sacrifice of Christ. So I think that the pain and the suffering, nature of Christ's life and everything is maybe a little more baked into than kind of maybe a triumphalism that's more present in the Protestant church.
And yes, and thank you for mentioning triumphalism, because I think that you're absolutely right about that. Because when we're describing, he talks about this as sort of the way of tears at the end of the introduction and sort of going into living this experience. Embracing pain and suffering is a big part of this, and seeing them as positive. And from his point of view, that is an important part of that office of prophet, is allowing pain and suffering to guide your criticism of the church. Does that make sense? Okay, phenomenal. What other thoughts do you guys have so far about this? And in your own experience, have anger and grief given you a better or deeper understanding of the love of God in your own lives?
Mine over the holidays.
Yeah, over the holidays?
Losing my son, to suicide through guns, through a gun, what it brought for me is it allowed me to, gain comfort from other people where instead of just being me, that I had to handle all of that. The community which is something that I've been very grateful for of late, the community that I've built around myself through, the death of my son, what went on with my ex-husband, just that God has given me a whole community of people that just love me and see who I am. Instead of having to try and hide, it just strips everything off and I can't hide.
Yeah. That's awesome. And I'm sorry about your son, and also grateful that you've experienced that.
Yeah.
Well, not a loss of your son, but the comfort that's come after that.
Yeah.
So.
I mean, one would think, why would you find comfort from losing him?
Right.
But that's the tension of like not excusing suffering, because we don't want to just, like poo-poo it, but there are things we can gain from it,
Yeah.
you know, as well.
Mhm.
I feel like you gain ministry into the community through suffering.
Yes,
And so much that as you understand and walk with suffering and others minister to you so that you can then go do that to others, because suffering is common to all.
yeah,
And when you see someone else doing that in your sphere, you're able to go in a very different way.
Yeah.
You know, and I heard someone say, you know, it's like when you see someone with a like outsized empathy, you can then immediately say, what happened?
right,
Like, hey, you don't just come up with that, you read about it. It's like you lived it and
Yeah.
came through it, or you're in the middle of it or whatever, and you're able to walk with other people on that.
Yeah,
And
I mean,
I've seen that in my life as a way of going like,
Yeah.
I'm hesitantly beginning to be thankful for it because
yeah,
when other people are going through it, like I start talking like a preacher. I mean, I start coming at like, this is the God that will be with us.
right,
yeah, for me, it gets me into trouble because that means I open myself up to trying to help other people, and it gets used
Mhm.
or misinterpreted in different ways. But
Makes you more vulnerable in ways.
no, I mean, I'm willing to ask someone a hard question.
Yeah.
Like, I know that they're going through a really hard time. I'm not afraid of it, because, I mean, what else could someone take away from me that hasn't already been taken away? I mean, and I'm still here, and I'm still, so it's not like anyone can really do anything to me that's then worse than you've already gone through, so.
Yeah.
But it has its drawbacks,
Mhm.
because people do take advantage of it or misinterpret it.
You're in good company. That happened to Jesus too.
Yeah, yeah.
Gotcha. Any others?
I'm just picking it off of
Sure.
what Carrie and Brady are saying, that I certainly would not ask for it or welcome it, but it's like it's the source of our superpower,
Yes,
right?
It
It's like
is.
you have to go through this, excuse me, shit, because that's what it felt like. And then on the other side of it, you go, what can you take away from me?
yeah.
I'm free. I am in him. I am powerful because
Mhm.
I've been through this. You can't hurt me.
Nope.
So
Fair enough, yeah. Yeah, no, it is, there's a certain liberation in experiencing the worst possible thing that has ever happened to you. Because you do have that moment of, well, what could be worse than this? No, not that I'm tempting fate and asking for worse than that. I want to be very, very clear about it. But you also realize that if you survive it, then you're still here and you came out the other end of that particular thing. And it gives you the opportunity to connect with other people. And you know what, I can't remember if it was a C.S. Lewis quote or if it was from another band that I listened to called Thrice. But the idea is that whenever we have a scar, it's a bridge to someone else's heart. It allows us to connect with people who've been through the same thing because we have felt the things that they are feeling.
But there's people that go through horrific stuff and only cling to anger.
Mhm.
And that's not.
Mhm.
That's not.
That could be problematic.
Yes,
Yes.
exactly, exactly.
Sure. So,
And just because we have gone through something doesn't mean that we have experienced it the same way as somebody else has.
that's true. That's true.
It's just not true.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not, no way do I ever think that I know what someone's going through.
Yeah.
I'm just willing to listen and
Right.
allow them
No, I
to.
understand, yeah.
Yeah, and we would all hope that we at least would get better, improved social skills after we've had something bad happen to us. And we're kind of getting a little bit close to time here, and I don't know if we have time to really unpack it. So what I'm gonna say for next week, so take a look at chapters 2 and 3. We're gonna start, well, he's gonna start guiding us through some particular prophets and some questions that arise from this. The thing that we start with was Yeah, I think that's right. Gosh, Amos, and then I cannot remember the title of chapter 3. Give me a quick second here. I think that the third chapter was something a little bit more abstract. Whoops, I skipped all the way to chapter 4.
Oh, mass.
Yeah, so I think he's actually gonna start looking at some critical thinking stuff.
Secret of the remnant.
Yeah. Which, yeah, so it looks like Isaiah, I think is one of the places he's gonna be poking around a little bit there. Who knows if he's gonna jump around there more. So those would be the 2 chapters that I would read for next week. Any parting comments or thoughts? Thank you for everybody who shared, especially the heavy stuff. I do appreciate that. Again, I want to remind you guys that when we're talking about heavy stuff, it's okay, make space for that. Just, I don't think it needs to be said, but I just want to say it anyway, because I'm just being a professor and that's what I do. Just respect folks who are talking about that stuff. And just, I don't know, read the book and be mindful of the way that it's making me feel. And I would invite you to pay attention to how these feelings of anger and sadness may actually end up producing positive things in your life, and maybe share that with us when you come back next week. Let's go ahead and close with a quick word of prayer, and then we will take off. Matt, would you mind closing us out?
Sure. Lord, thank you for Paul and for his leadership today, for this class and the sharing that we've done. We're reading this at a timely moment. And I pray that as we do, that your Spirit indeed would speak to us, breathe life into us as we do this, and help us in our study and in our time together to be present to one another and to the voice of your Spirit and the prophets that speak to us today. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. All right, see you all next week. Well, or in second service if you're heading down the right. So we look